be like, oh, I know, I need to ring that person I met at EnviroPAST in 2022 because I know that they're working on that. You'll be surprised at the connections you'll make here. All right, our first speaker is Dr. George Slim, Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor. That sounds like a pretty important and cool job, if I do say so myself. So, like I said, unfortunately, Juliet Gerrard has got COVID, so it's pretty unfair to expect someone with COVID to turn up and infect us all and try and give a talk whilst they're not feeling very well. So George is a consultant, is it with Radegund? Radegund, Life Sciences. Oh. Working with organisations to provide policy advice, access to science knowledge, and assisting with funding sources, as well as consulting on strategy in the management of research and intellectual property. He works with companies, universities, government agencies, Crown Research Institutes, and industry organisations. Currently, his ongoing roles are Senior Policy Advisor to Professor Dame Juliet Gerrard, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, maintaining a presence in Wellington for her office, as well as providing policy advice to Science New Zealand and the Association of Crown Research Institutes. With over 35 years of experience in the science system in New Zealand and offshore, he's worked in academia, the government research sector, and government. He's fluent in academic, bureaucrat, and commercial. I love it. 3 languages that are pretty crucial, I would imagine, in your role, and is really able to translate between all of them. So here we go. Our first speaker, let's have a big round of applause for Dr. George Slim. I don't know, I'm not sure what the rules are. You're the science advisor.
Science advisor. I'm at least 2 meters away from you, so I'm sorry. I'll take my mask off because it makes it easier for me. Okay. So I'm sorry you don't get the full Juliet Gerrard experience, which is worth getting. So if you do get a chance to listen to her somewhere else, give it a go. The 2 things I would say about her are first of all, if you give her too much of the Professor Dame Juliet Gerrard stuff, she gets a bit sniffy, which is never a good idea. So just call her Juliet. And the other thing is when you get made a dame or whatever, you get some little badges, and the idea is that you wear those on your lapel, which is great if you are a habitual wearer of lapels, which I obviously am. She isn't, so she had them made into earrings. And that's almost treason, I think. So when she walks past some people, she has to kind of go, because you're really not supposed to change any of the things that you get given in your investiture. Okay, so what do we want to do? I'm afraid our plan was to hijack your interest in the environment slightly and teach you some science policy advice, which I hope will be valuable as you try and make a difference. I think one of the key things that, as Tim said, the great part about this role is A, I don't have to do all the work because I'm not the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, but B, I feel I can make a difference because I have that access and she can do things directly. So what I want to do is talk a wee bit about what the office does, what Juliet in the office do, how it looks like, what kind of advice we give, and then we'll run through the example of Rethinking Plastics, which is the first big report that the office did, and I think has made quite an impressive difference. Okay, so what does the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor do? Basically, it's what it says on the box. The Prime Minister wants science advice, the Prime Minister gets science advice. When Juliet first met Jacinda, Prime Minister Ardern, I suppose we should call her at this point, Juliet gave Prime Minister Ardern her cell phone number, and the PM kind of laughed and said, what, you think we're going to need science advice in the middle of the night? So it was interesting when 2 years later, Juliet couldn't really go to bed much before 2 in the morning because the texts were still coming through asking what was going on. So we have had quite a ride on what we do. So Prime Minister asks for science advice, Prime Minister gets science advice, and if ministers, we can talk to other ministers so long as we have the permission of the PM to do so. So that's the kind of the core of the role. The second part of the role is helping, doing things like this, helping with the public understanding of science and also the public understanding of science policy, which is quite a thing that is important, and we've all seen how that works. And then the other thing that she does a lot of is contact with the science system. So as the scientists can approach her and say, look, this is looking like it's going to be a problem for New Zealand, The government is ignoring this piece of advice, and we really want to get that across. And so Juliet can make things go both ways. She can provide advice to the PM. She can talk down about what's going on in the science world, and she can act as a conduit for science up to the PM, which is quite a valuable role. A few people exploit it, but mostly it works really well. And then the final part, which is what she was actually doing when she caught COVID. So she's currently in a motel room in Sydney, hopefully asleep, getting a bit of rest while she recovers from COVID that she caught as part of the PM's delegation. So that's broadly what we do. The vision for the role is really to be a bridge, a trusted, accessible, somebody you can find, and you can find us info@pmcsa.org.ac.auckland.ac.nz is the way through. And you can get hold of her, and if you want to email her, by all means do. You'll see her at events around the place. Come up and chat to her. She is very accessible, and she has the trust of the ministers, and they talk to her, and so she feeds. So that has worked out extremely well. The principles came from a paper in Nature that Juliet read just before, or just as she was getting the job. And the idea is to be inclusive, to cover everybody, to be rigorous, to make sure that the science, that advice that she gives has backing of actual tested science, to be transparent about where the limits, about how that advice is provided, where it came from, and who it's been given to, and be accessible. The challenge, and we'll run into this a number of times throughout this talk, the challenge is to provide advice in a way that's timely and usable, because the politics has a very, very hard 3-year time frame. In New Zealand, every 3 years there's an election. A lot of stuff has to be done in that 3 years. Promises beyond that don't mean much. As you probably know, the cycle of science is 30 years, 100 years. We're still working on problems that were raised by Newton around how gravity works. So the science and the policy timeframes are quite tricky. Providing advice that's rigorous and reliable in the political timeframe can be really tricky. So we do our best. So who are we? So there's Professor Dame Juliet Gerrard there at the top, which is, yep. That's obviously not me. I'm down here in the bottom of the picture you just saw before, at slightly lower resolution. So we have Susie, who runs the office and keeps track of the network of science advisors that we'll meet in a minute. We've got three now, Emily, Celia, and Colson. And Emma, we've got four, let me do the math, four writers, researchers, people who work in the office actually making the contacts and doing the writing. And then we have me faffing around in Wellington, having coffee with people, and occasionally knifing the other person in the back to make sure that we get what we want done. As well as the group in the office in Auckland and myself in Wellington, we also manage the departmental science advisors. So many of the departments, and there's a list there. I think there might be one. Oh, we're still working on Te Puna Kokiri, getting them on board. So all of these agencies have a chief science advisor that sits somewhere in their structure. We bring those people together as a network, and they're a conduit for getting material into agencies. And they're also, if things aren't working well in that agency, they can talk to Juliet about it, and she can cycle around and make sure things happen. So they're a very useful group of people. And we try and meet them at least once a month, and they have pretty regular access to Juliet. If you're interested in an interesting, exciting job, these are some of the good ones. So what is it about providing science advice? So I think the key thing, and I hope if you don't remember anything else from this talk, please remember this, that when you're talking about policy, science is never the only advice that you're giving when you're setting policy. And it's very rarely the most important. And so walking up and banging the table and says, this is what the science says, and you should ignore all the other societal impacts, the equity impacts, the sustainability impacts, this is what the science says, and you should do this, then you're very much on a hiding to nothing. Science is good with the problem, it's good at identifying the options, but it doesn't tell you what you should do. It tells you what will happen if you do this, and you can decide whether you want that to happen or not. Nobody was ever convinced by the facts. So politicians have to make that based on the whole, they are the elected people, scientists aren't elected. We can have our views, we can have done the work, we can feel very strongly about things. But ultimately, we live in a democracy, and it's the people the people who are elected into those positions to make the decisions. And you can't get grumpy with them for that. You can be, and people do get very, very wound up about it all. Science is about the science, about the facts, about how things work. It shouldn't be used as a proxy. You shouldn't work down from your values to the science. Your values should be based, at least partially, on the science. So we very often find, and plastics is perhaps a nice easy one because it's not such a big issue, but in things like nitrates in water or 5G or COVID, we saw an awful lot about COVID. People are making arguments, trying to back them on science when in fact it's a values argument. We don't like masks, we won't wear masks, and then we'll try and show that masks won't work, rather than doing the work showing, yeah, masks work. If we want to protect people from COVID, we should make the effort to wear them. So that's I'm hoping that you'll remember that, and then we can get on with the rest of the business. Okay, so having got the role, sitting in the office deciding what to do, Juliet went out, ran a huge number of public meetings, spoke to a lot of people, and got them to write down their main science issues on a little coloured post-it notes. And we took them back to the office, hundreds of them, as you can see there, bound them up on the wall and tried to characterise them. And a huge number of them revolved around plastics. We have to remember this is 2018, so one or two other issues which have risen since were less important then. We sat down and chatted with the Prime Minister about what our first big report should do. We hadn't done this before. We had no idea how it would go. The Professor Sir Peter Gluckman, who started the role, had done smallish reports. He hadn't sat down and done a real big report. And so we wanted something that would resonate, something that was important, and something that would make a difference. And so we had started addressing the plastics issue. And so the obvious thing about plastics is that there are an awful lot of them around. Since the 50s, 8.3 billion tonnes of plastic has been produced. Nearly 2/3 or 3/4, depending on who you ask, is still out there. Hasn't been either landfilled or disposed of properly. So it's just faffing around on its own in the atmosphere. And you can give, I'm not a huge fan of these, but you know, it's a lot. 80 million times the weight of a blue whale is faffing around, has been made, and 60 odd million times of them are floating around in the environment. And there are obviously quite a few less blue whales out there. So the thing about plastics is it's an awful lot of material. So what did we do with it? So 79% has gone into landfill or been discarded, and around about 2/3 of it hasn't even made it into landfill. So those are the facts. So we sat down and started doing the report, and that was Rachel Cheroni Clark who wrote the report and has now left the office and is working with Callaghan Innovation, helping them with their issues. So the issues that we found were that there's an awful lot of plastic out there. It uses up an awful lot of resource, but it's not plastic that is the problem. It's us who are the problem. Plastic is fantastic. It's light, it's strong, it's cheap, it does the job, it's water resistant, and you can make it airtight. Plastic works fantastically well. The issue with it is, it's not that we shouldn't have plastic or that we shouldn't use plastic, it's that we don't use plastic responsibly. The analogy I like, if you wanted to wrap your sandwiches in something, you could use a nice gold leaf. Gold is flexible, it seals up pretty well, it's clean, it's got some antimicrobial properties. You could wrap your sandwiches in a gold leaf wrapper. At the end of the day, you would not throw that out. You would put that away, you would wash it, and you would use it for your sandwiches the next day. Plastic, so many people just think, and it's in the bin or it's dropped on the way home. So that is the big issue. The real issue isn't a science issue around plastic, it's a science issue around what do we do with plastic to get the benefits and not have the costs. Okay, and the key thing that we need to do with this, and this is plastic, this is almost any sustainability issue. For many years, we've talked about how many of those are, 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. The issue with that is it's too late. The plastic is already out there and you think, damn it, I've got all this plastic, what am I gonna do with it? Rather than how can I manage plastic right from the start? Do I need to use plastic? Is there something else I could use? If I do want to use plastic, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to replace it with something else? Once I've got it in there, think of the whole lifestyle. So the issue with plastic is not suddenly finding a piece of plastic sitting in the bottom of your bag and thinking, damn it, what am I going to do with it? It's whoever made that plastic think, is this the best thing to use? How is it going to manage throughout the whole of its life? And so that was the kind of the overarching thing that we wanted to get across with our report. I've got too many buttons here. So obviously that brings us to the circular economy, which is, I'm hoping familiar. Everybody must know about the circular economy. We've had these discussions. So the circular economy, it's kind of a no-brainer now. Instead of just taking it, making things shit, how can I get rid of it quickly and throwing it away? Building the process from the start so that when you make it, you know how it's going to be reused. All of that stuff is built into the use of the product itself. And that's particularly important in plastic. So instead of thinking, I have a plastic object that's going to wrap around this product, think about how am I going to manage this product to get it to the person in the best and most sustainable way, and then get the plastic or whatever it's wrapped in back and reuse it and make sense of it. And so to take that is to take an integrated approach, which starts right at the design phase, the most important part of this whole, and if you want to steal these pictures for your own use, there's nice high resolution versions of them up on the Prime Minister Chief Science Advisor website. So if you stick in New Zealand Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor into Auntie Google, she will take you to that site, and pretty much all of these pictures are stolen straight out of this report. So the key thing that we wanted to do was to say design is the most important. What happens at the design stage is going to influence everything else all the way through, and then to work down the recycling. And our current report actually is now on food waste, which is maybe we can next year, if you wanted, we can talk about food waste when we've done our report. This whole business of working it down so that it's used in the way that it preserves the most of its function and the most of its energy all the way through. Okay, so taking an integrated review, and this comes from the National, so used to lecturing these things without, okay. So we sat down, our report took about a year, we spoke to hundreds of people, we had a panel of 10, we had a reference group of, I think, over 40 people in the end. And what did our report say? So first of all, New Zealand has no overarching idea of plastic. People use it, it comes in. We don't even really know how much plastic comes in. We know how much plastic comes in as a raw material. We don't know how much plastic comes in as packaging, as a already formed product. So we need a national overarching plan. The way to take it forward is to have government thinking about, well, what are we going to do about plastic? How can we use the principles that we've talked about making sure that we know what's going to happen to it all the way through? And then consistency. We found one of them, you must have run into this, that each local body area has a different way of dealing with its resource, a different way of dealing with plastic. How can we bring that together? Because one of the things you need when you're managing any sort of resource are the economies of scale to try and get things consistency. So New Zealand acts as a single collection point. All the plastic that is collected across the country looks the same and is managed in the same way. And so that we can do that. Innovate and amplify somewhat is to get best practice taken out and made universal practice. Many good examples of how this should be done are already out there, and especially new businesses and businesses which sign up to the certification schemes, they have this in place. How can we get that across the whole of New Zealand, all businesses doing it? So it's not special, this is just something businesses do. It's not something that only a few environmentally conscious people do. It's something that everybody does without thinking. You don't scrumple up your lunch wrap and throw it away. You reuse it, or you recycle it, or you make sure that it goes to the appropriate place. But we need to think about the environmental and health impacts, that these are the important place. go through. So it's getting the plastic which is out there back under control. And what are the impacts of plastic, especially microplastics, which are a relatively new thing. Nobody really knows the impact that they have on health. I mean, fortunately, it's not so bad because a lot of us would be a lot sicker given the amount of it that's there. But what are the actual health impacts of plastic? We don't know. So those were our recommendations on collecting data. Everybody likes to collect data. You can't really know how to deal with a problem until you know how big the problem is. So those were our reports. So you can do these reports. You know, it's quite a chunky document. I can't remember. I think that one's a couple of hundred pages. I've written a lot of reports which have sat on people's shelves and nothing has really happened. So what happened after with this? So yeah, okay, I'm ahead of myself. So the vision was really to make best practice standard practice. So everybody does what we do. So this was our action plan, was to do the things that we were discussing. And then what does success look like? So that we actually know where the plastic is, we know where it's going, and we're thinking about what's happening. And again, this diagram is in the report. So what happened after the recommendation? Well, we had a nice party, that's for sure. So the Prime Minister came along, we went to Sustainable Seas, their headquarters in Auckland, and we had a nice party. The reason I'm not in any photographs is because I spent most of my time at the party chatting to Neve, who was keen to crawl into small spaces at that stage. So we had a nice party. The recommendations were picked up by the Ministry for the Environment. So we handed over, and we had spoken to the Ministry for the Environment, and so they knew this was coming. They knew what we were thinking. They had a pretty good idea of what we'd saying, and we had an idea that they were willing to pick this up, because part of the problem with these reports, as I said, is you write a report, 200 odd pages, sits on everybody's desk, everybody says, that's a nice report, you have the party, and that's the end of it. If you want your recommendations to have an impact, you have to be sure that the people who are going to do the job are ready for them and are keen to take it forward. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. You can bang on people's doors and you can shout at them about the science. You can do anything that you like, but if people who have to take the action are not ready to take that action, you will not get anywhere. So you have to bring people along on the journey, which is a tremendously important part of the work that we do. So by the time the report came out, pretty much everybody who had to know about who was going to do things next, all the ministers knew what was going to, all the officials knew what was coming. They were a bit grumpy about some of it. We said, you know, never mind, get over it. But they were ready to take this report. We got sign off from Cabinet, which means that if the Cabinet says, then the officials have to do what they say. And then it was incorporated in the speech of the throne. So there was some good public, because again, dealing with plastic is such a no-brainer that it's something that people can tell you a lot of good news about, which is a really useful place to be in the sustainable business. So there was quite a bit of publicity. There were a few announceables. I can't remember which ones were now, but a few single-use plastic items got banned, and I think, sorry, I've forgotten exactly what. Well, we had a few bans that people could go out, and so the PM could stand up and say, hey, you know, this is what's happening. And an announceable is always good. If you're involved in the policy space, packaging things up so you get an immediate announceable is always a good idea. If any of you do grow up to work in the policy space, and I'd recommend it. It's actually some of your really early years are a bit grim, but once you get into it, it's a lot of fun. Make sure you've got an announceable, you've got something that will go on the news and gets people's heads up and starts people's thing. So now, in nearly a year later, so we tabled our report towards the beginning of 2019. An awful lot of work happened behind the scenes. We then went up with a full-on government response to our report. So the government basically picked up a whole range of the reports and started talking about the quick announceables, get rid of a few single-use plastic items is nice, but it's not a game changer. A year's or so's work later, we now have some serious impact where hard to recycle things are taken out of the environment. PVC is hard to recycle, it's expensive. Polystyrene is an absolute nightmare. And getting that out of the system had to be one of our first goals in making plastic sustainable. And then doing some more, getting some serious, the things that really turn up. When the sustainable seas people pick things up the beaches, these are the items that they find on the loose, broken up, and they need to put out. So those, and they're easy to get rid of. There are plenty of alternatives, so we can do that. So you announce your report, you get a few things going. There is some pretty heavy work behind the scenes to make sure everything that will work, and then you can start to begin to make a real difference. Okay, so the big changes to the report are around plastic. Plastic items, you know, that you use them, you shouldn't throw them away. They work well. Plastic items are not it's the single-use items, and it's sustainable. It's packaging that is the real nightmare in the environment. 36% of packaging, so it's a lot of plastic in there, and 36% of the plastic turns into packaging, and the bulk of it is single-use. You wrap your item, you unwrap it, you bin it, and that's it. And so this is where I think we can make the difference. So as I said, plastic isn't the problem, it's what we do with it. This is, damn it, I forgot what the acronym stands for, the United Nations Environmental Programme. Plastic is, as I said, it's great, fabulous stuff. Let's use it responsibly. We need to be able to use plastic when it's the best option. Why would you work around something which is so effective when you just to make your life difficult, when if you looked after it properly, it wouldn't be a problem. There is no one thing that you can do. This needs a systems approach. And the reason that we got involved in this in the first place in the plastics area is because there was no single agency looking at it. It was spread across government. We needed to find it a home and pull everybody together to make sure that it worked. We need a whole of life cycle approach, a systems approach. Everybody needs to do their job. The people who make it, the people who use it, the people who dispose of it, the people who regulate how it's made, all of those people need to come together to make sure that it happens. And we simply can't afford any more. You know, there's already what we've said 8.6, so there's 6 odd billion tons of plastic faffing around in the environment. We simply cannot afford to have any more plastic. I think the sea is heading towards water, sodium chloride, and then the next thing down is plastic, and then it's all the stuff that lives in the sea. So we cannot afford to let any more plastic into the environment. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of plastic? I'm speaking far too fast. I have this problem of A, speaking far too fast, and B, just I teach science communication occasionally, and one of the things I teach in science communication is that the old white guy standing at the front of the lecture theatre spouting stuff, however agreeable, isn't the way to change people's minds, that you need a two-way dialogue. And then, of course, I am almost invariably the old guy at the front of the lecture, spouting stuff. So if you do want to say anything, and it looks like we're going to have a, it's very useful. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards, so hold on. And, okay, so those 6 are. So we looked at the hierarchy, starting right at the top, the most important one, and that's why we drew it the biggest enough from memory in the brightest colour. Rethink. Do you need to use plastic in the first place? Design the packaging for its whole of life, not just for appearance. You know, it's been a while now, but you know, my kiddies used to go into the toy shop. There would be a huge box, a tiny little toy, an awful lot of plastic, and all sorts of little tricky bits that you could poke your finger into the hole and poke the button to make its noise. You don't need all of that. Can you design packaging that will enhance the appearance, that will make sure the product gets to you in time? And I presented some of these slides a couple of weeks ago at a packaging conference, because packaging in food is really important. There's a real balance between food waste and packaging. The more packaging you put around it, all that polystyrene box, all that plastic keeping the air out, all the various tricky bits and pieces that you do to keep it fresh, means that you get much less food waste. You take away all the packaging, you get more food waste. You wrap things up tighter so you get less food waste, you end up with more packaging. Those two problems need to be thought of together. And there's the classic story of the cucumber. Why do you buy your cucumbers wrapped in plastic? Because if you don't, they only last about a day and you throw away tons and tons of cucumbers. A teeny bit of plastic, you stick them on the shelf, keeps the air, the moisture in, stops the air getting in, and you have a much more saleable, longer life product. So those trade-offs are where you need to do the thinking. And if you do need to use plastic, let's make it so that it's easy to recyclable. Let's think about how it's going to work when you take it apart and stick it in the recycling bin. And part of the thing at this plastic conference was labeling packaging so that it tells you which part, what thing to do with each part. The lid, that needs to go to landfill. The body is recyclable. Another part of it, you have to take it back to the shop to make sure they're recyclable. So do all of that right at the start. The next thing is refuse. Don't use plastic if you don't need to. If there is an alternative that works better and has the same impact and is more sustainable, then use that. And there are some pretty tricky trade-offs in there. Glass looks fantastic, but it's quite expensive to recycle. Light plastic can be better than glass. All of these things need to be worked through. And don't use plastics that can't be recycled. And we're trying to put in regulations to make sure that it happens, because your plastic milk bottle is ideal. Take it out, clean it, stick it back in the recycling, melt it down, you've got a new plastic. It goes round and round and round practically forever. Polystyrene, it's a nightmare. It burns before it melts. Once it's out in the environment, it's space. It breaks down into tiny pieces really quickly. It's absolutely horrible. Don't use that. Obviously, reduce the classic stuff. Use less plastic. It's good for your bottom line if you're making stuff. It's good for the environment. Often people are just stuck in this. This is how the packaging has been made. They replace the original packaging with a different sort of plastic, but it's still the same when you could think it through, and lightweighting, packaging, contrasting, all of those things that people do are kind of straightforward. Reusing. Again, design it from the start. And as a business, when you are thinking about your packaging, think about how you can get it back. And again, legislation is useful there. So car manufacturers in Europe, for instance, they have to show how they can get all of their car back in a way that they can recycle it. Here in New Zealand, we're too far away from that, but reusable containers and container deposit schemes, a whole range of things can be legislated for, and that will be becoming increasingly common. But when you sell a product, your brand is associated with the product, and your brand is associated with the packaging for that product. And so if you want to protect your brand, you need to think about what you're going to do with that packaging, because Coca-Cola have found to their cost, nobody likes finding thousands of beautifully labelled, almost imperviously indestructible pieces of Coca-Cola bottles being consumed by wildlife or washing up on pristine beaches. And so they are making a considerable effort to deal with it. So think about how you are going to put that all the way through. Obviously, if people are recycling plastic, you need a market. So if you are using recycled plastic, you're adding to that circular economy, and you're providing a market for that material. The replace thing, can you use, don't get me started on biodegradable, compostable, plant-based plastics, because we'll be here for quite a while. There are some real tensions in what is compostable, what is biodegradable, what is made from plants. Just because it's made from plants doesn't mean it's biodegradable in any fashion. If you have a plastic which is compostable that looks identical to a plastic that is recyclable, you mix those two in your recycling stream, it's neither recyclable nor compostable. You've just made a nasty sticky mess, which could easily be avoided by staying away, in fact, from the plant plastic. So PLA, I don't know if your PLA is an anathema. It drives me nuts that people get very excited about PLA and write from plants on the box, and they're just making everybody's lives difficult. I say that at the packaging conference I got shouted at, so feel free because some people are very invested in the plant thing. And then obviously the recycling. Make it as easy as possible and make it consistent. And we are trying to get a nationwide scheme of recycled labels so that you know what to do. And in Europe, they have a thing called a product, what's it called? Digital product passport. And so that's a little barcode that has to be on every product that's sold in the European Union. When you take a photograph of it, it tells you where it came from. It tells you that the labour was sustainable. It tells you how to recycle it when it's finished. It doesn't apply to packaging, which is a nuisance, but it's a great scheme. So how are we going? Somewhere it tells me what the next question is. Yes, which is okay. So that leads us to two questions. There are people with those microphones. I don't trust myself to throw them. I'm sorry. I used to be reasonably good with a chalk duster, but that door. So sorry, I've dulled you into shouted at you for so long. You can't even think straight.
Come on. You can do it. Yeah.
Oh, that netball. Hi.
Hold it really close.
Right. How would we implement some of the advice you've had along the sort of, how would we make a memorable impact and a long-lasting impact if we were, let's say, trying to get recycling in at our school?
At school, yeah, so schools are very active on this. I think, yeah. I think going to your, getting involved in the school hierarchy and going to them and saying, this is how it works. This is making a good case about how that works. And, based on some of the science, picking up what's in the report and saying, this is a huge problem, but it's everybody's problem. And every little piece you do, it's what they used to say in my school. We didn't worry about recycling. We worried about littering. Back in the dark ages before NCEA. And so we were constantly talking about littering. So you pick stuff up, and if 4 people throw something down and you pick up 5 pieces yourself, you've made a difference, even though all you've done that day is pick up 5 pieces of litter. And so if each organisation starts this, and particularly as consumers, it's brutal, but money talks. When things become an economic necessity, when people's brand value, when you don't buy stuff that isn't recyclable, as a consumer, you have huge power. You probably have more power than anybody. And the second thing is voting. If people are putting up policies, vote for the people with the policies that make that difference. I worry about our current Green Party a little bit. Vote for the people who align with your values, buy the things that align with your values, espouse those values yourself, and then if you are an influential person, use that influence to make it happen in the organisation which you control or have a stake in, and keep kind of building from there. And it's the people who do that. So I think the people who are part of the office are all people who got involved in that sort of process quite early on and want to actually keep driving it. Because if you just ignore it, then nothing will happen.
I think one thing for me on that one would be, so I've got a 10-year-old daughter and she has a packed lunch every day because there's no school canteen. And when I was at school in the dark ages in the UK, we had lunch was provided, we paid for it, but lunch was provided by the school. So you got centralized food with with less packaging, whereas my daughter takes a little orange juice carton and a little cheese stick in a plastic wrapper. And I think the food and the plastics are massively interlinked. Yeah. And I think that could be an interesting conversation to have at school is why can't we, find out, what is the plastic waste? Is it from you coming into school as the individual, or is it the school, or a bit of both?
Yeah, so my son, who's now 20 odd, he wouldn't take plastic stuff to school, and so we had a plastic lunchbox, but everything in there had to be kind of on its loose, which had its moments because things mix. But so it could get kind of nasty, but he seemed relaxed and ate it anyway.
Who's next?
Any further questions?
Yes. You gonna launch it from there? Oh, I was hoping you, come on, next time.
Hi.
I just sort of had a comment in terms of recycling. Part of the reason why recycling is a bit of an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff solution is because it's not always accessible. Like, for example, the apartment building where I live doesn't have any recycling facilities. My mum lives rurally, so she needs to drive to a depot to deal with recycling. And if you've got any ideas for whether there would be a way for the government to make it mandatory for example, for commercial properties to ensure that there's recycling.
Yes, so the consistency across in making recycling facilities available, the curbside recycling is the big one because that has the biggest impact. So I live in an apartment building, we have recycling things. For a while, the body corporate said, oh, look, you're making a mess down there, and so they took it all away, but there was just so much fuss, they had to bring it all back again. And our body corporate fees went up because we got a more expensive kind of recycling, but you can do that. The rural one is more interesting, and the key to that is to make the plastic go back to where you got it from. And so if you can put recycling things in shops, like supermarkets, petrol stations, places like that, the rural people, you take the stuff back to your house, you eat it, you pack it up, and then you need to bring it back. So a rural collection scheme is just far too expensive, but then rural delivery schemes, people don't expect rural delivery schemes. So there has to be the effort made to bring it back, but making it, by rather than having to go to a transfer station to have all that stuff done in the places you would go to anyway, seems to be the way forward. And container deposit schemes and things which encourage you, so it's not just accessible, but you get a benefit from doing it is also a big part. So all of these things are being talked about. The issue is always cost and people's willingness. So I don't know if you're, who are they, AgCalm, run a scheme so that rural plastics like bailage wrap, all of those things are picked up on a regular basis. You bring them back to the RD1 and the other stores. You bring back your chemical containers, they are washed out and reused or recycled. So people are working on this, but again, it requires, people pulling the string to make sure that it happened and people providing the stuff at the other end. But no, that's a good point. Accessibility, making it easy, making it simple. You look at the box, it says what you need to do with the package. You look at the corner of the shop and there are the right bins for you to throw it away. That's what gets recycling up.
I'll add to that one. I think you'd be surprised at the number of companies that want to try and do more good. There's like FMG, Farmers Mutual Group, that they are really into community and sustainability. They're a rural insurer. And this is why the connection's so important. Connect, have the conversation, ask. Because if you're not asking, they don't know. But if you just say to them, hey, look, what could you guys do as a company? Or could you connect us? The more you just ask, and I think more and more people, like you're saying, people are realizing that if they're not thinking this way in the very near future, they're going to be in trouble as a business. So I think it's about taking as much action as you can. But like you said, it is hard for us all to have to do it all the time. But I think more and more the companies are getting into it. You can totally throw that one.
My question is that I know there's a very small percentage of plastic that is actually recycled in the end, like ultimately recycled. So my question is, how much of this is because people don't have accessibility to recycling, that people don't recycle, or how much is it that recycling itself is not a very effective solution?
That's a very interesting question, and one which I'm going to struggle to answer slightly. So the plastic which can be easily recycled, so the plastic high density polyethylene type 1, which milk bottles and things like that, there's a real demand for that. If people could get hold of more milk bottles, people get more of that plastic, they'd recycle it, they would be able to sell it, everybody would be happy. And so in that case, it's an issue around people just not recycling, they're throwing it away. Every time you get a thing with number 1 on it, recycle it because there is a huge demand for it. Number 2, not so good. when you get down into things like 5, which is PVC, that's quite difficult to recycle. And the market isn't really there because the recycled plastic isn't as good. You lose quality every time you recycle it. It can't be clear. The colours are a real problem. And so that's a bit dodgy. There's probably more plastic turning up than can easily be recycled in New Zealand, and so we're having to ship it offshore. And so the answer is always in policy, it depends. And some things work really well. They're easy plastics to recycle that don't degrade, that it's not expensive, that aren't too bothered by colour, not a problem. Soft plastic recycling, that's another issue. You'll see the collection things in your supermarkets. It's soft plastic is a real nasty one because it blows around and degrades and gets horrible. It's always a mixture of things. You can put it in your supermarket now, but the market for it is quite limited. People now turn it into fence posts, and they can make more fence posts, so that's good. Who knows how long a plastic fence post is going to last, and what it's going to do when it's in the environment. That's an interesting point, but so this is where you need a systems approach. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's another thing. There isn't something that works for everything. But if you've got a number 1 on it, recycle it. Number 2, recycle. That's a real driver in there.
Come on. Oh, almost. It's almost morning tea. We'll get you some energy for the big throws. Hold it really close. Hold it really close.
How many proper recycling plants are there in New Zealand?
How many? I don't know. So as I say, so the big urban areas have recycling plants. There's nobody who actually recycles in the Wellington region, So it depends what you mean. So there's sorting. The recycling plants, there's a couple of big ones in Auckland. There's a biggish one down in Christchurch for number 1 and does a lot of industrial offcuts. That's what got it started. So I would have to think about that. We could do with more plants, but that would solve the recycling problem. But then would they be economic? Would the people operating them make money? That's the real question. And so if they're not going to make money selling, then who subsidises them? Is that the local body or is that the taxpayer? And then the discussion gets quite brutal. So the easy to recycle plastics, we have companies doing it. They need more plastic. The harder ones, we don't have enough to deal with the plastic we have in the environment, but that's probably more for it's more for economic reasons than it is for environmental. If you gave people the money, they would make the plants and they would go them. New Zealand has a real discussion going about plastic to energy and waste to energy plants, which is quite difficult. In some cases, landfill is the best way of doing it. By putting in chemical recycling or energy recycling, you run the risk of making the situation worse and spending a lot of money to do it than you could with a landfill where things can sit and potentially be recoverable when the technology. So that's a really interesting question, and one I'm sorry I don't know. There is some data on the recycling in the report, but the issue is an economic one, not a technology one at this point.
Hello. Just to elaborate on that response, you said it was an economic issue, and you said that the main people that would pay would be local body or the taxpayer. And I thought, are you looking into corporate responsibility, like corporations like Uber Eats who produce and manufacture, or like other kind of middlemen of like a lot of plastic waste, McDonald's, and you saw the international corporations? Why aren't they paying for it?
So why aren't they paying for it? That's an interesting question. So ideally, we would rather not have them pay for it. We'd rather them not put that sort of plastic into the environment. So the key thing that we would like to see happen is that sort of plastic doesn't turn up in the environment, and so recycling is an option, and they can pay for it. And you're right, deposit recovery schemes and building the cost of recovering the plastic in is definitely an option that would make the multinationals pay. tracking down a multinational and getting money out of it is no straightforward. You know, if you look at even the tax issues, it's so yeah, getting lump sums out of an international company is tough. Making sure that their products include the cost of the recycling, that's the way forward. Ideally, we would do that so that it incentivizes them to use the stuff which is easy and then the other thing you can do, which makes everybody pay, is to put the cost of landfill up. And that's being done. The cost of landfill is rising quite substantially, and that money is going to be used for recycling schemes and for paying for some of these issues. So, yeah. But rocking up to Coca-Cola and saying, look, guys, you owe us $10 billion because of all this plastic is going to be tricky.
I think, you know, look at some of the companies that are leading this though. So just locally, you've got Alba shoes made out of hemp, biodegradable, allegedly. Theoretically, they'll just like fall apart and biodegrade. Little Yellow Bird, who make clothing, they have a take-back scheme. So they will take any clothes and recycle them, repurpose them, and they're creating a circular economy. They're doing that off their own back. Like, no one's asked them to do it, but they're just like, well, someone needs to do it, we're going to do it. And then locally, you've got again, the reusable coffee cups. So I think you'll be surprised how quickly we see an economy being built on businesses that are trying to solve the problem, rather than the old school way of, well, we're making the cheapest, most economical thing that we can, and we don't care about the externalities, the impact that that has. I think in general, we're in a real transformational and transcendent time, and it's going to be messy for the next few years. But I think the general trend is people realize that I would hazard to guess that within 5 years, you might not see a plastic Coca-Cola bottle. That would just be a thought. I just think in 5 years' time, it would be untenable that you would want to get a plastic bottle full of Coke. That's just my personal thought.
I would agree. Yeah, it's the consumer that drives.
Next question. Or is it supplementary, or are you happy to? You can always come back. You go with yours. Or was this one? Oh, who was first? Oh, sorry.
Okay, all good. This is a little bit of a complicated question, but I hope it makes sense. Earlier, you were talking about necessary plastics in grocery packaging, like we were talking about the cucumber and the shrink wrap. Do you think that that is potentially a quick fix and maybe quite naive, and that the issue is more on education of how to use food properly? Because I've seen in pizza households, kitchen bins just sitting there while they're eating, I don't know, like chips or eating fast food or food that's packaged. And the issue is more that we don't know how to use our fresh produce, not that, and that's a quick fix.
So I agree with you. So using the produce. And the food waste thing is really showing this up. So using the produce and educating people how to use the produce, buy stuff in season, buy it when it's fresh, use it. Don't buy more than you need. Don't get excited. You know, buy stuff without packaging. So all of that works, but that only works from the shop to where it gets thrown away. There's a lot of stuff that happens from where it's grown to get it to the shop. And that's where, you know, light, cheap, reusable packaging that works, and very often plastic is the best option. That works really well. The stuff then sits in the shop can deal with it, or the consumer can bring it back. And so I would say plastic is bad. You know, I don't know if you read Animal Farm, but, you know, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, gets you into trouble very quickly. By saying all plastic is bad and evil, you're painting yourself into a corner and stopping yourself from using a very efficient material that works great. Thinking about how you use it is much more important. Education from that the last mile is really important. And you're right, people, you know, how to cook on a sustainable basis is often an issue. Time is an issue. A huge range of these things boil down to issues such as inequity and poverty and so on. If you could deal with those issues, you could educate people, and it would be of value to them. They could do it. So there's a whole societal thing about bringing everybody up so that we can solve these issues. But yes, education is a huge part of this, and particularly once it's in the hands of the consumer, that's where education is really valuable. And again, MFE have money going into that. So no, good point, thank you.
That's great. I was just wondering if you would find yourself getting frustrated with how slow policy feels, or how like to research it and make it and then actually enact change. And I wanted to know how you deal with that, and also what we as people who aren't like right in the thick of making policy can do to maybe help speed it up, or at least feel like we're actually doing something. And I know there's submissions and like reading things up, but I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so that's right. So the policy process, A, you've only got a 3-year cycle, and B, everything takes longer than you think, and you need to catch the wave. And so, yes, you know, now I'm nearly 62 now, so my life, you know, I've recovered from this. You can't get too excited. I mean, so I get over it by celebrating the small wins, I guess, by seeing the end of the process and move it. And so I've been working on my area, which is methamphetamine in houses, and getting the levels of that settled down. We started working that first day I got the job. We're expecting the legislation. I was expecting the consultation document to be out this year. So what's that, 4 years down the line? So yes, frustration at how slow policy moves is inevitable. How you get over it? I get over it by celebrating the small wins, by seeing the movement, by realizing where the next blockage is and going and having a crack at that next blockage. Personally, in terms of doing things, obviously you're a consumer buying the right stuff, putting your money where you belong, where it belongs, you know, where it makes the most difference is one thing. Submissions, yeah, submissions are an interesting thing. Don't just fill out the postcard that whoever sends you and put your name on the bottom and pick it in, because that will be ignored. Nobody cares. It's disappointing. So, you know, they call them formal submissions and they ignore them. If you are going to make a submission, make it sensible, make it personal, and put some evidence and provide a solution. So it's all very well to go in and say, New Zealand needs to do this, we've all got this problem, so much plastic in the universe, we need to stop it. Flip your submission in. Person reads it thinking, yep, no, great, I agree. What are we going to do about it? If you can get together with a group who can offer a solution and say, look, plastic is a problem. If we banned unrecyclable plastics, that would solve at least a quarter of the problem of the stuff that's in the environment. Let's do that. That's achievable, but that requires a bit of experience, a bit of bringing stuff together. So it's kind of a learning process. To be honest, the most important thing you can do is network over these next 2 days. The most important thing you can do is to get to know other people, like-minded people, and work together and form a block who can then have the knowledge and the work and do it. So that would be my advice. So yeah, so I've been in policy, directly working in policy these last 20 years. And yeah, absolutely, it's slow and frustrating and horrible. I mean, people, there are so many stupid people in the universe, and many of them work in policy, you know, and you rock up to them and, you know, they block you and they fight you and they disagree with you and they don't, you know, and presumably they feel the same about me. So yeah, one step at a time, take it as far as you can. What is the obstacle? How can I deal with that obstacle? Next obstacle, who do I need to help me? Next obstacle, and so on down the line. And eventually you get the thing changed. The plastic is banned and you feel like you've made a difference. But yeah.
Cool. One quick question from me. If someone wants to get into your kind of role, how could they go about it? Can they come and pitch up to Parliament and just say, hey, can I come and hang out? Or
so I don't know what level you people are, but a lot of the universities and businesses run internship schemes and science policy. There's one here, it's a good one. And so that gets you into the job. You can do a degree in science that's applicable, that's a concern, you know, so for science advice, get a solid understanding of science and work in that science for a bit and then step in. A lot of the ministries run internship programs. My career is by no means, so I always work. It's very difficult to be a shining example, so you can be a terrible warning, and that works just as well. So I used to be a scientist. I got a bit bored with science, so I got involved in commercialisation. I realised the issues in commercialisation weren't really commercialisation issues, they were policy issues, so I got involved in science policy. I met a lot of people, had coffee with a lot of people. When Juliet got the job, I knew Juliet, had known Juliet for many years, and she knew that I knew a lot of people in Wellington. And so when she got the job, she rang up and said, well, how much time have you got for me? Because I need somebody who knows what's happening in Wellington. And so I would say, again, it's back to this, it's not what you know, it's who you know and how you can apply what you know through the people that you know. So just the chatting, the coffee and the networking is my contact list is 1,700 odd people. And so I leverage that, really. Learn to drink coffee.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah. You got it?
Awesome.
Thanks very
Thanks for that. Yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts from me before we get into morning tea. Is Will in the